Well, thank you. It's really a treat for me to be here on behalf of Mayor Bloomberg and all of our administration and to visit with you for a few minutes this morning. But before I jump into the topic at hand, let me just say a couple of things to kind of frame the morning to also. It's been great to hear these introductory comments and to hear from Professor Martell and also from Rick about all the good things that are going on and that all the success in 7 years this is already built to. It's really, you can feel the crescendo, and congratulations to all of you. It's quite exciting. I also have to say, too, that I know what a great job Nancy Plager's done to kind of make this happen, and it would just be remiss for me not to add my shout out to her for what's been accomplished. It was also good to hear the role of all those others who've done so much, and as Professor Martell said, it's these people behind the scenes that make something like today that goes so smoothly really so special. Also, too, congratulations. It's great to be here with Congressman Velasquez, who will be here in a few minutes, and with the privilege of recognizing the 6 organizations that have done so much. Several of them I'm personally aware of and know what great contributors they are, and it was fun for me to read about the others and to become familiar with them and to understand the time that you're taking this morning to honor them seems so very appropriate. I think that international trade, we heard some framing comments a few minutes ago, and you could take a talk and really spend a lot of time talking about the historical perspective and the arc of activity that really goes back 400 years with New York, and as the professor described, through the East India Trade Company, Erie Canal, and all the issues of today. But I think really the plan for us is to just recognize that is the case, and I'm not going to address those issues and give you a historical narrative. But I think from a framing perspective, you just have to realize that the New York City is the largest contributor to U.S. exports, $161 billion in 2011, which is greater than 10% of all U.S. exports. Now, we know this is accurate for one key reason. This comes straight from a Baruch report, so we know that this is good info, and so I think we can take that as gospel. Also, too, as you learn about New York and what I think some of its inherent advantages are, my boss, Mayor Bloomberg, talks all the time, bless you, about the fact that 36% of the people that live in New York City and the 5 boroughs are first-generation Americans, and we view that as a huge positive. When you go to the borough of Queens, it's almost 50%. And when you look at this idea of people coming together, it's really extraordinary. Sometimes people describe New York City as a mosaic, and Mayor Bloomberg always disagrees and says, no, I don't believe that. I think it's really much more than that. It's a mixture. And the lines get blurred between the people as opposed to in a mosaic where you can still see the distinct frames of each type. And instead, in New York, the benefit is it becomes a mixture, which is really a great asset for us. I also think, too, as the gentleman from the Port Authority mentioned, that New York City's harbor is a major competitive advantage. We have the largest port on the East Coast and the 3rd largest port in the country. It's big on jobs, too. Almost 150,000 and 270,000 total in the region jobs, and so we see. Air cargo also is important. And the other type of import that I think you might not think about in this context that we think about a lot is tourism. So how does that an export or an import? Let me describe why. Last year, because of the good work of lots of people in the city, in particular those at NYC and Co., we had a bit more than 50 million visitors come to New York City. So that's interesting. The next point I'd like to tell you is that of the 50 million, about 10 million or 20% came from overseas. We have about 45% of the market share of tourists to the United States that can come from overseas. Now, one more factoid about that is that 20%, remember 10 million of 50 million, account for more than half of the spend of tourism. So the 300,000 plus jobs in the tourism industry, international tourists are really important for a large part. International tourists come and stay longer and spend more. And we really want to continue to win at the prospect of having them think of New York as a first stop whenever they come to America. So now with those framing comments, let me tell you what the plan is this morning. I thought what I would do would be talk for a few minutes just about shaping and framing how the mayor has organized us to think about the economy here in New York City. And I'll try to outline the fundamentals so you can understand our framework for how we think about it. And I hope you'll see that it really fits right in with the issues that you're interested in with international trade. And then secondly, I'll talk a bit about a specific initiative that we're focused on that we think is really forward-looking, and the mayor's been a key sponsor of, and I hope that'll be something that you'll find interesting. So the plan is to lay out our framework and then talk about one specific example, which is our Applied Sciences Initiative, which we think you'll see as being interesting. But as we start, the New York City economic snapshot is a pretty good one in many ways. Our economy's outperformed the rest of the country since the financial crisis a few years ago. And you know, this economy here in New York City is about a $1.3 trillion economy, which would put it just behind Spain in terms of the international perspective. But also, too, if you look at the $75 billion budget that we have for New York City, that would be the fourth largest in the United States from any type of governmental. The United States government will be the first largest. The state of California is the second. The state of New York is the third. And the fourth largest budget is here in New York City. So we also have, as you know, about 8.4 million people. We're debating that with the census a little bit. But of that 8.3 million people, that means about 3.2 million jobs. We have four sectors that contribute more than 300,000 jobs. So think about it, that's four sectors with about 10%. And those four sectors would be healthcare, business services, finance, and retail. So all of those are drivers, and you can think there's a thread of international trade through all of those, that we have to be strong in our international engagement in order to be successful in any of those things. Over the last couple of years, as the economy has bounced back or at least stabilized, New York has now regained all of the jobs plus of those which we lost in the recession, and that puts us ahead of the rest of the country. We're not where we'd like to be, and I always like to punch pause here because I can go on and talk about all the good things going on. But despite that, we still have challenges in the economy. None of us should be happy with the unemployment level that the level that it is. And we have to get up every day, and my boss, Mayor Bloomberg, tells me I have three responsibilities, and those are jobs, jobs, and jobs. And then he said, in case you missed that, let me repeat it. And that's really the focus on. We can't live in a community that has the unemployment rate as high as it is today, and what we have to do is get the economy moving so that we can create more jobs. And I think, too, that the 10% headline number that we all focus on, and whether it's 9.5 or 9.8 or 9.2, that really isn't the issue, because I think those numbers really understate the issue. There are certain places in our city that the unemployment rate is much higher. If you look for young men of color in the Bronx, I'm convinced the unemployment rate is 30, 35, 40%. And none of us should be patient or accepting of a situation in an economy and a community where that's the case. So getting up every day and saying, what can we do about this to start to get the job engine back working, has to be the focus of everyone who's taken the pledge and has the privilege of working in government. Let me also talk, though, as I shift back to what we're trying to do, is one of the mayor's key themes has been diversifying the economy. As I said, we have four sectors now with 300,000 jobs, and the goal is what sectors can we help to grow. And you've seen the mayor focus on things like technology, tourism, film, and design, all of which have grown dramatically. You know, the numbers are quite clear that we're making progress at diversifying the economy. You can see that we recently passed Boston, Massachusetts, as the second largest place that's a recipient of venture capital funding for new businesses, and now the only thing between us and first place is Silicon Valley. So we've got the silver medal, and now we're focused on winning the gold, and we really just have to kind of keep pushing, but I think it's good to know that we're making progress. Also, too, in another new industry that's really had a great growth of looking at media and television, that you see the number of films and TV pilots being filmed here in New York are just on the rise in all shapes and forms. And you know, those are not jobs for the actors and the actresses. That's really not the focus. If you look, they're usually 8 or 10 times as many jobs that are good union jobs working behind the scenes around all of these industries. So it's really one that's been an area of good focus. Also, too, as I mentioned, the tourism is something that's really been a great success that Mayor Bloomberg has highlighted. But with that framework, let me tell you about the 4 ways, the foundational aspects that Mayor Bloomberg instructs us to think about the economy and kind of the philosophies that we're focused on. And the 4 you can see here are improving quality of life, creating a pro-business environment, investing in the future, And the last, where I'm going to go in a bit more detail about one project, is innovation and economic transformation. But those are the four foundations, and they're pretty straightforward. What I thought I would do would be just give you a glimpse of how we're thinking about the first three, with a little more detail down into the weeds on the last. So that's kind of the plan. Now, you might say quality of life. What's that got to do with the economic robustness of New York City? Well, I think it has a heck of a lot to do with it. You know, people have a choice of where they live, and as my boss is kind of fond of saying, is that capital comes to where the people are, not the opposite. People don't go where the capital is. And we have to have the best people here, and we have to have them wanting to live here and thinking that New York is the place to live, work, and visit. And if we don't win on all three of those, we won't be accomplishing as much as we'd all wish to. And it gets back to that flywheel of jobs, of really getting that going so that it really helps to correct and puts so many of our citizens on the front foot. Now, when we talk about quality of life, you can see on the slide public safety, schools, clean streets, cultural institutions. And I think another change that I would talk about is, you know, when I was starting my career, really the idea was you felt as though you needed to be in a big city to connect to things. And I think today, with technology the way it is, lots of really smart people have a career choice where they can be in Austin or Boulder or Seattle or Portland, and they don't have to come to big cities. So we have to compete not just with Chicago or Los Angeles or Atlanta or places like that. We also have to compete with some of those other communities that are offering a different perspective. And I think that's really gets to some of these issues, whether you look at parks or whether you look at the idea of good public schools. These are all part of making sure that we win. I think the one that you have to highlight is really the success that began about 20 years ago with Mayor Giuliani, with really breaking the back of the crime issue here in New York City. These numbers are spoken about often, I think, but they do bear repeating. And that is that if you look back in 1990, we had about 2,200 murders a year, and this year that basically we'll have about 500. And that reduction in crime really makes people comfortable as this is a place they can be, and it really is something that is a safe place, and people should feel comfortable in lots of ways. We could go into any of these other areas in more detail, but let me keep moving so that we can cover a broader perspective. What do I mean by creating a pro-business environment? Well, this slide is a bit busy, but I think that you can see what we're talking about here is regulation that's balanced, but also is supportive and encouraging of business. Now, we all know that regulation is crucial. People need to know that the food they eat is safe. They need to know that what they buy or what they think they're buying is what they're buying, and they need to be able to believe that regulation is working for them. But we also have to be sure that this regulation doesn't become too heavy and basically dampen down the prospect of businesses succeeding or businesses starting. And that's pretty easy to have happen. What happens a lot is that when people pass new laws or new regulations, nothing ever comes off the books. And so as a result, there's this cumulative effect of more and more regulation, and being committed to trying to make sure that things work as well as they can is really a crucial issue. And I think the city can do more here, and I'm raising my hand and saying I'm enlisting in this army, but today we give out about 300 permits, licenses, and certificates. Permits, licenses, and certificates the city awards to its citizens for them to be able to do certain things. Now, let's assume for a second that all 300 of those are appropriate. But the negative about it is there really isn't the right business customer service mentality. For you to apply for your permit, license, and certificate, you have to go and appear in person 90% of the time. Only 10% of the time are you able to engage with your government online. So 90% you show up in person between 10 and 4, but not between 12 and 2, and you bring a ballpoint pen, and I'd also suggest something to read, because that really is, and for small businesses, for you to lock the door on your business someplace far away from downtown Manhattan to come and engage with the city isn't the right perspective we have if we want to make this more pro-business. So we're thinking about this a lot. As the President said, one of my responsibilities is for small businesses, and we're trying to help them figure out the way to steer through this. We focused on restaurants, trying to reduce the amount of time it takes a restaurant to get into business. We're focused on other ways we can to kind of chop through this. But it really gets to the idea of controlling expenses and making sure that we're on top of things. We've talked a lot about one expense item that's been out out of control, which is the pension expense. Over Mayor Bloomberg's time, this expense has grown at 18.8% a year, and there's nothing that's natural about growing at 18.8% per year compounded. Any small number becomes a big number very quickly if it grows in that way. When Mayor Bloomberg arrived in office, that number was a bit more than $1 billion, and this year pension expense will be more than $9 billion. So think about what that's taken away from the things we'd like to do in other ways in terms of crowding out from other things. So I think, let me just repeat again, the goal is to have the right regulation in a balanced way, but to be pro-business, to encourage businesses to be successful and get started here in New York. The third cornerstone that we talk about a lot at City Hall is the idea of investing in the future. I think there's a tension where who's going to be the advocate for long-term projects that will span over the life of various elected officials. And I think that really is in many ways the responsibility of the executive branch, and whether it's in Washington or Albany or here in New York City. And that's something that the mayor has tried to be a champion of. As he says regularly, when you stop investing in the future hits the road. And so being someone who's always trying to put his hand on the scale in favor of investment at the expense of near-term consumption. So there is a price to this, and the price is we're going to do less that we benefit from today to do more that will benefit from the long term down the road. And this is true in something like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, too, where they're continually balancing, what do you do for today versus what do you do when you look way down the road. And I think the mayor tries very hard to make sure he's putting his thumb on the scale in favor of longer-term things. And we mentioned things like transportation and critical infrastructure, whether it's the 7-line extension, whether it's a comprehensive waterfront revitalization plan, the third water tunnel. And that's something that's not very glamorous until it's needed. And if you don't do these kinds of things now, you can't fix them quickly. They take many, many years, and someone has to say, I'm looking out over the horizon, this is the kind of thing we're going to do. And also, too, as mentioned, public and affordable housing. We have good news, and that is the population of the city of New York is growing. Then we have different news, and that is we need more housing to ensure that we can have the right opportunities for housing for these people. And the new housing marketplace plan is to produce 165,000 units during the time of the mayor, and we're on track to do that, which will basically generate space for 500,000 New Yorkers. So any way we look at it, that's in terms of housing, that's a positive thing to be focused on. In terms of the commercial world, we've also tried to encourage commercial development. We've seen it in Manhattan and Lower Manhattan and also in Hudson Yards. We've also seen it in other districts too, whether it's downtown Brooklyn, whether it's Stapleton and Staten Island. We're also seeing the exciting things going on in Long Island City that we need to keep investing here. Today, about 65%, two-thirds, of all of the Class A office space in New York City, so-called Class A office space in New York City, is more than 50 years old. And when you look at what new businesses want and you compare a 50-year-old building with internal columns and lower ceilings and outdated HVAC, it's not what people want. And we have to continually refresh that stock of commercial office space to be able to have people come and think of New York as the place they want to be. So now, let me just move to the fourth point I wanted to make and to highlight and talk about innovation and economic transformation, and maybe drill a little bit more into one project that's been something that's been a key initiative for the mayor, and talk in that about a bit more detail. So it takes a second to frame this from my perspective, and that is that we think about the economy all around the world as having gone through these three stages. And for 3,000 years, the arc was really one of an agrarian focus, and then we shifted for about 300 years into one that was more of an industrial focus. And now we see the economy is changing, and we're really at that inflection point where it's changing into being something that's more information-driven. And so what are the skills? And you can see at each of these inflection points, the skills for success are different. And what can we do to help our citizens and our economy get on the front foot with regard to this change that's happening right now before us? And I think that this has been terrific because the mayor, working with the city council and with Speaker Quinn, has tried to talk about this idea of basically what we can do to make New York City be more successful in this inflection point of the economy. And so the way I think about it is there are three ways we want to win. And in no particular order. One is that we have successful companies that have started here in New York and are doing well, that are winners in this kind of new information economy. And whether it's Foursquare, Tumblr, Second Market, Etsy, ZocDoc, these are companies from all over New York that are doing well, that were born right here. And they're already at the success point. They're not startups anymore. They're on their front foot with hundreds of millions of dollars of sales, hundreds of employees all over New York doing well. So that's one type of winner. Let's help them continue to do well and encourage them and recognize their success. Number two is we've also had some what I would call immigrants who have come to the economy here. And it's great to have them. And as I said earlier, we have 35% people that are first-generation Americans. We should be pleased to have people come from all over the rest of the country that recognize New York as the place to be. And if you see Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all of those companies which are large, successful, and impressive, they were born in California, but they've immigrated to New York. And so that's another part of trade that fits in with what you were talking about today. But I also think, too, that we need to make sure that we're also a rich environment for new companies starting today. So we want to win at making our strong companies do well. We want to encourage other successful companies to come here. And we also want to make sure we have fertile ground for new companies to start and be successful. And that's really been something that we've been thinking about, and that serves to diversify the economy. Just after the financial crisis, we spent some time with the Economic Development Company in New York, visiting with leaders all over the city of New York. And we asked them, what did they think we needed? What was the missing ingredient for us to continue to do well economically in New York City? We have a great history, but what do we need to basically continue to be successful in the future? And the thing we heard from all of this group, there was one clarion voice that basically said that the missing ingredient was that we were not as strong in science and engineering in higher education as we would like to be. And I think that that was a bit of a wake-up call for us. And you know, New York kind of stepped back and said, well, gee, we're strong in higher education, so let's think about this for a second. We have 670,000 post-secondary students in New York City. That's more than any place else in the country or the world. We have more students, post-secondary students, than Boston has people. So why aren't we known as the college town? But so that's another framing issue too. What can we do to help this industry of education do well in New York? But I think when we were honest about the heat map of our skills, that we were not as strong in science and engineering as some other places. And so why we had the richness of a large, important post-secondary population, and we also had a diversity of college experiences, where we had the highly selective schools, we had community colleges, we had commuter colleges, all these things. We were not as strong as we would wish to be with regard to science and engineering. So that basically spawned a plan, which was the mayor organized a opportunity with an RFP and responses for trying to invite people to come to New York City. And the contest basically was one where the city, in an organized way, ran an RFP. We said we would provide land. We gave 3 choices, 4 originally and then reduced to 3. We offered capital, $100 million of the taxpayers' money, if someone would come here and meet certain guidelines and ambitions with regard to what we wanted to do to change the nature of the economy. So 54 weeks later, which is incredibly quick, and you put higher education and government together, and you don't think about rapid progress. But in 54 weeks, this thing all came together, and last December, Mayor Bloomberg announced the selection of Cornell and the Technion, building an 11-acre campus on Roosevelt Island. And this is really something exciting. This is, so if you remember, I said that the city was contributing $100 million of the taxpayers' money. It's a serious responsibility to talk about giving taxpayers money to encourage something. But in return, we're going to get a $2 billion investment from Cornell and the Technion. They received a single largest gift in the history of the school that was given solely with the understanding that it would only transfer to the school if they won this contest. So one of their alumni said that they would give $350 million to encourage this change. And they're going to be focused on media, healthcare, and the built environment from an applied science and engineering perspective. So when you think about that, and they'll build 2 million square feet, There'll be 2,000 students and partner with the DOE also, Department of Education here in New York City, to touch 10,000 students and 250 teachers with regard to enhancing science and engineering in the public schools. They also said that they would have a fund of $150 million to fund startup businesses here in New York under one condition. They agreed to stay in New York. So you can see this is really an economic development perspective that we generated. Roosevelt Island today, and you kind of, if you imagine as you head east across the Ed Koch Bridge, and if you look to your south, or you can come across the tram, today you have the Goldwater Kohler Hospital, and then you have a small state park, and then you have the ruins of the original smallpox hospital, and then this autumn you'll be opening the Four Freedoms Park. But that area where Goldwater and Kohler is about 10 acres, and that's where we'll see things transform, and you'll see the new campus for Roosevelt Island, which will be Cornell and the Technion, to be focused on applied science and engineering. These pictures are exciting. They're not real design. These were just put up as examples, but they recently announced who the architects will be, and it'll be first class. They've done other great work in New York City. And so the plan here is that when we leave office in 597 days, but who's counting, then we'll deliver the land will be in raw form. Cornell will then, and the Technion will then take over. Their plans are to build the first 4 buildings straight away, which will be about 600,000 or 700,000 square feet. So that's 13 plus a couple of years is 15 or 16. So that's how it'll unfold in terms of being there. For those of you that don't go to Roosevelt Island often, it's a fantastic. You have all kinds of transportation. I was there the other day and had a meeting in Midtown, and in 8 minutes you take the subway straight to 6th Avenue and 57th, and it works fantastically, and it's just moments away. And you can also see it's also very close to the area where the medical institutions are along First Avenue. So there are all kinds of good things going on there. I think the other thing that we haven't talked about enough probably is what I believe this will do for Western Queens and the area between Long Island City and Roosevelt Island, as you have this be an area of focus for academia, startups, and things like that. So it's another strong economic element, economic development aspect to the project. But that's not all. We also announced just a month ago that we're having a second activity, which will be NYU going to downtown Brooklyn to start their Center for Urban Science and Progress. And this is something that we've been working with also, and they'll be creating a new school there, again, focused on applied science and engineering, specifically, though, related to how cities work and what's going on there. It's a consortium with other academic institutions and with companies, and we believe this building, 370 J Street, will be a great place for them to bring this downtown Brooklyn area alive. It's already got a lot of things going on, and you've seen what's happened in Dumbo, but this moves that whole area to a larger stage and to more downtown Brooklyn, which we're excited about too. This will have 500 graduate and doctoral students with 50 different new faculty members, new incremental relative to what we've had. You can see these are the visuals for what it looked like as an MTA building, and now their renderings for what they think it'll look like as a new center for urban science and progress. So when you look at these projects that the mayor's put together, and you put the Cornell and the Technion ambitions together into one, you can see it creates jobs in 3 ways. One, you get to build the campus, and labor's been very supportive of these projects, and they've been fantastic to work with regard to these ambitions. And that kicks out about 22,000 jobs. And then you have to operate the campus. And when we think of campuses, we think of academics. And sure, there's some of those, but really the way the campus runs is that at least a third to a half of the jobs are not academics, but they're people that are basically managing and running the campus. And these are jobs for people that have less than a BA, but are mission critical to making sure things work, and that create a campus that goes on and operates in perpetuity. And the last, which is really, I think, the wild card, is that what will these campuses do with regard to job creation? I mentioned the Cornell and the Technion's incubator fund, and we believe that when you think about it, that there'll be several tens of billions of dollars of economic activity over the next 30 years. If you remember, we put $100 million of the taxpayers' money into the Cornell and the Technion project and $10 million into the NYU project. So we feel like this is pretty good stewardship with regard to how to be thinking about preparing the economy for the future. Now, it's not just in higher ed, too, we've also talked and been thinking a lot about what we can do with regard to the Department of Education and some of their ambitions too. We recently announced that venture capital leader Fred Wilson and Mayor Bloomberg are going to be forming an Academy for Software Engineering, which will be a new high school focused on development of software and applications. And if you take this, I think this foots in a way too to some of the things we're talking about. You know, in the 40s, when there was a new industry just beginning to appear on the rise in the aviation industry, all throughout Queens there were several schools that focused their curriculum on aviation high schools and things of that nature. And today, software engineering is the same skill. If you look out over the future and you say what skills will be important and what industries are about to happen here, then having more and more people that are comfortable with software engineering seems to us like a great way to get in a better prepared place. This new high school, and we hopefully will have others behind it, will be located in the Flatiron Gramercy area. It'll be supported and integrated within the tech industry. There'll be mentors there, and it'll be part of this whole ecosystem and internships and things like that. So we're excited about that, and we believe that the curriculum, which is just being organized, but they'll open this fall. So again, this is not a tested into high school. This is open to all. There were 700 applicants for about 110 spaces. Next fall, this will start with 110 ninth graders, and then we'll be adding out the school by adding 100 of each new grade as they go forward. So this will be fully developed in 4 years, starting with the 100 new next year. So you can see from the mayor's initiative what we're trying to do in our remaining time is to basically think about this applied sciences as a real game changer with an intergenerational throw weight, where this spring we'll also continue to negotiate with a couple of other schools like Carnegie Mellon and Columbia. This coming fall, we'll have the first students for Cornell and Technion. So even though they don't have the space in Roosevelt Island for 3 or 4 more years, for the students right here in New York City, that you'll be starting to make this happen. We'll also have the NYU CUSP program open next fall, and also next fall the Academy for Software Engineering will open. So you can see that's great. And then in 2017, as I mentioned, we'll basically start to have the students on Roosevelt Island, and then about that same time, or maybe a couple of years later, they'll also be in 370 J Street in Brooklyn, and I think that kind of keeps the drumbeat going. So let me just try to pause here and say thank you for letting me speak to you for a few minutes and have the chance to tell you about Mayor Bloomberg's strategy for how he's instructing us to think about the economy. We feel like we've got some good things going on that we're pleased about. This is the framework of thinking about making sure that people who live in New York have a place that's inviting and encouraging where people want to be. We have to win at wanting people to be here, talented people. We want them to live here, work here, and visit here. Number one. If we don't do that, we have no chance of any of the other dominoes going our way. They won't fall in the right direction. Second, we accept responsibility that we need to have good regulation, but not heavy-handed regulation, and also recognizing the cost of regulation so that we can encourage businesses to grow. Third, we commit to you that we're going to make the long-term investments that maybe some others don't see so that we can ensure the future can be one that we can all be proud of and that we don't get into a position where we can't respond to challenges because we've waited too long. And that's really something the mayor talks to us about continually. And lastly, to talk to you for a few minutes about the economic transformation of how we've been thinking about trying to prepare for this inflection point as the economy shifts, and one that's less focused on industrial, but more focused on really issues around information technology and things like that. So thanks so much for having me to visit with you and to tell you about Mayor Bloomberg's strategy, and have a great rest of the conference, and congratulations to the 6 companies that are getting recognized. It's fantastic, and congratulations to Baruch and all the sponsors on the conference. Thanks so very much.